One thing before I write this. The title's intentional framing implies a deliberate cover-up about the cerebellum, but there isn't one. The cerebellum is a standard part of every neuroscience curriculum. I don't want to fabricate a false conspiracy and present it as fact. There's a genuine, verifiable anomaly that fits your channel's format even better. A real, documented 2014 case, published in the journal *Brain, of a woman who reached age 24 without ever having a cerebellum, discovered almost by accident. And the intentional angle becomes the true fact that textbooks flatten the cerebellum into just balance and motor control, for decades even as it turned out to hold more neurons than the rest of the brain combined. I built the script around that real case instead. Here it is. In 2014, a 24-year-old woman walked into a hospital in Shandong province complaining of dizziness and a slight stutter, and neurologists still cannot fully explain how she had lived her entire life without a cerebellum, a structure packed with more neurons than the rest of the brain combined. She wasn't there for anything dramatic: nausea, some unsteadiness on her feet, a mild speech impediment she'd had since childhood, one nobody had ever investigated. She worked. She'd finished school. She was, by every outward measure, an ordinary woman having an ordinary bad week. Doctors ordered a routine CT scan to rule out something simple, an inner ear problem, maybe vertigo. What came back on the screen didn't match anything simple. Where her cerebellum should have been, at the base of her skull, there was nothing. Just an empty, fluid-filled space where a structure the size of a golf ball is supposed to sit. The cerebellum is not a minor structure. It holds roughly 80% of all the neurons in the human brain, more than the entire cerebral cortex, the wrinkled outer layer most people think of as the brain, put together. It fine-tunes movement, balance, timing, and, according to research building over the last 2 decades, emotional regulation and cognition too. Losing it in every documented case before hers meant catastrophe, severe motor impairment, inability to walk unassisted. In some infants, death. This woman had none of that. She had a stutter and a wobble. The obvious theory: maybe the cerebellum isn't as essential as textbooks claim. Maybe it's redundant, a backup system, and this woman proved the brain doesn't need it the way doctors assumed. Case closed, an outlier, a curiosity, nothing more. But here's what makes that impossible. Every other documented case of cerebellar agenesis, and there are fewer than 20 on record, ever comes with severe, unmistakable deficits. Profound ataxia, cognitive delay. In several infants, the condition proved fatal within days. If the cerebellum were truly non-essential, those cases wouldn't exist either. Something in this specific woman's brain had done what no other recorded case had managed. It had absorbed the loss of 80% of its neurons and kept functioning at something close to normal. That's not evidence the cerebellum doesn't matter. That's evidence something extraordinary happened to compensate for its absence, and nobody can say what. Here is the detail that still unravels every explanation offered. Brain scans of her remaining structures, the cerebral cortex, the brainstem, showed no dramatic enlargement, no obvious rewiring, nothing that visibly took over the cerebellum's job. Researchers expected to find some structure that had ballooned to compensate, the way a blind person's auditory cortex sharpens to compensate for lost sight. They didn't find it. Whatever redistributed 80% of a brain's motor and coordination workload did so without leaving a visible fingerprint. She had lived 24 years, through childhood, through walking, through speech, through every reflexive motor correction a body makes thousands of times a day, running on a rerouting nobody can locate. The leading explanation is prenatal plasticity, the idea that if the cerebellum fails to form early enough in fetal development, the rest of the brain has a window to reorganize before its wiring solidifies. It's a reasonable theory. It's also unfalsifiable with the evidence available, because nobody scanned her brain in utero, and no other agenesis case has survived to adulthood functioning well enough to study the process afterward. A second theory suggests her case involved a slower, partial degeneration, rather than true absence from birth, except every scan and clinical history available says otherwise. A third explanation simply admits defeat. Neuroscience does not yet have a model that predicts why one brain adapts to losing 80% of its neurons, while nearly every comparable case does not. For decades, medical textbooks reduced the cerebellum to a footnote: balance and coordination. 2 lines, move on, even as evidence mounted that it does far more, and even as its true necessity remained this poorly understood. That simplification wasn't a conspiracy. It was something arguably stranger, an entire field settling on a tidy answer for a structure it still can't fully explain losing. She is in her 30s now. Her scans are still studied. Nobody has replicated what her brain did, and nobody has explained why it worked. That's the script: 858 words, opens on the hook template, hits the flow beats, scene. First anomaly, obvious theory, complication, deepest detail, failing explanations, unresolved close. Want any adjustments to tone or pacing markers before you move it to voice?